Colleen Duffy stands in her kitchen with a leash still coiled in her hand, trying to decide whether the dog can stay in this house. Reggie is asleep in his usual spot by the back door. Nothing about the room looks any different than it did a month ago. That's part of what makes this so hard. 3 weeks ago, a stranger at a public park needed emergency treatment because of him. Colleen has spent every day since then turning the same question over. How does a family live with that? And 2 days ago, something happened inside this house that made it impossible to put that question off any longer. To understand how she got here, you have to go back to the beginning when none of this seemed possible. Reggie came home to the Duffys on an ordinary Saturday in early spring, a lean, alert dog with a fast mind and an even faster tail. Within a week, he'd learned where the water bowl lived, which door led outside, and that Ben, 7 years old, patient in the particular way only a 7-year-old with a new dog can be, almost always had a pocket full of small, soft treats. Ben taught him to sit, then to touch a hand with his nose, then, badly, to roll over. Reggie never quite committed to that one. He'd flop halfway and look up at Ben like the joke was on purpose. Before long, Reggie was simply part of the house. He was usually wherever Colleen was. If she moved from the kitchen to the living room, he moved too, a few seconds behind, settling near her feet like it had never occurred to him to do otherwise. At some point, Colleen stopped noticing the sound of his tags following her from room to room. It had just become part of what the house sounded like. Doug threw a ball for him in the backyard until his arm gave out before Reggie did. And Colleen told her sister on the phone that she thought they'd gotten lucky, that some dogs just fit right away like they'd always belonged there. Reggie learned quickly. He was affectionate, close to Colleen, and easy to live with inside that house. The kind of dog who made ordinary evenings feel a little fuller than they had before. Colleen had been around enough difficult dog situations to know how different this felt. Mostly, it felt like relief. She stopped bracing for something to go wrong. Little by little, she stopped questioning it. She believed she understood this dog. The park was routine. A Saturday afternoon, a rec field a few blocks from the house, a pickup soccer game at one end, while families spread out blankets at the other. Colleen had Reggie on his leash, the same leash he wore on every walk, while Ben chased a ball near the tree line. A man jogging toward the field to join the game cut across the grass. He was moving fast, closing the distance to where Colleen and Reggie stood. What happened next took only a few seconds. Reggie's body changed. The leash went tight in Colleen's hand. She felt him move before she understood what he was doing. It was over almost as quickly as it started. The man needed emergency treatment. Colleen stood there afterward, still holding the leash. Someone helped move Ben farther back. Someone else asked for her name and number. The field around her was suddenly full of strangers who weren't there for a soccer game anymore. This was more than Reggie frightening her. Somebody had actually been hurt. That was different. Ben's small hand found hers while they waited, and she held on to it longer than she needed to. In the days after, the house looked exactly the way it always had. Reggie went back to the same spot by the back door. He ate at the same times. He still followed her from room to room. What had changed was Colleen. The way she watched him now, the half-second of hesitation before she reached for his collar, how even an ordinary afternoon could suddenly make her stop and think. Ben still had his bag of training treats in the kitchen drawer, but the easy little games, sit, touch, the half-hearted rollover, quietly stopped happening. Nobody said out loud why. There was still the question of whether the man would pursue legal action, and there was a visit to the vet to rule out anything obvious. Pain, a neurological issue, something a blood panel could point to and say, "Here, this is why." Nothing came back that simple. Physically, there was no obvious answer. Without one, Colleen went looking elsewhere. She talked to one trainer recommended by a neighbor, then another. Both told her some version of the same thing. A dog like Reggie needed to understand, clearly and immediately, who was in charge. If she backed off when he pushed, they said, she'd be teaching him that pushing worked. It was the kind of certainty Colleen badly wanted. Somebody telling her exactly what had gone wrong felt like solid ground after weeks of having none. So she followed it. Rules tightened. Reggie's world got smaller. Less freedom in the house, a leash even in the backyard. Colleen started watching for anything that looked like him testing her. She was trying harder than she had ever tried at anything, and somehow, the harder she tried, the less she trusted her own read on him. Then came the appointment that changed the shape of the problem entirely. Reggie needed blood work, and he struggled to hold still for it. It took 4 people to keep him steady long enough for the vet tech to finish. In the days that followed, Colleen started noticing something she hadn't been dealing with before. When she reached toward him or came too close too quickly, Reggie growled. Not at strangers, not at the mailman. At her. She didn't understand it, and by then, understanding wasn't really the point anymore. What mattered was that the thing she thought had ended at the park had somehow found its way into her own living room, into the space between her and the dog she'd once believed she knew completely. And she'd already learned what she believed a growl meant. It meant a dog testing his position. If she stepped back now, she was teaching him something she couldn't afford to teach him. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday evening, Colleen reached down to clip on his leash for a walk. Reggie stiffened and made that low sound in his throat. She didn't stop. She told herself this was the moment that mattered, the one where she couldn't let him win. She reached again. Reggie bit her. It wasn't the park. It wasn't a stranger this time. It was her own hand, and it was enough to send her to urgent care for stitches. She sat in the waiting room with her hand wrapped, thinking about how strange it was to be afraid of a dog who, an hour earlier, had been asleep by the back door like always. When she got home, Reggie was right where she'd left him. The bandage made it harder to tell herself she'd somehow misread what had happened. For the first time, she knew what it felt like to hesitate before walking into her own kitchen. And Ben was 7. He lived in that house too. After being bitten herself, Colleen couldn't think about that the same way anymore. That night, she sat at the kitchen table with Doug across from her and said the sentence she never thought she'd hear herself say. Maybe Reggie can't stay. Nobody in that kitchen thought less of her for saying it. A man had already been seriously hurt. Now she had been too. Loving Reggie had never been the question. Whether keeping him was something she could responsibly do. That was the question. And there wasn't an easy answer in either direction. If he stayed, Colleen would be responsible for whatever happened next. If he left, she had no idea what would happen to him or whether she'd ever fully understand what had gone wrong between them. Neither answer felt right. For a while, there was nothing to do but sit with that. It was Doug who finally said something that shifted things, not because he had some hidden understanding of dogs, but because he'd been watching what was happening in the house for weeks. So much of what they'd tried since the park had made the house tenser, not calmer. More correction, more confinement, more tests of will, and somehow the problem hadn't gotten smaller. It had moved closer. What if, he said, they stopped adding pressure for a while? Not fixed anything, not decided anything permanent, just stopped. It wasn't a solution. At first, it didn't feel like much of anything. But the house got quieter in small, unremarkable ways. Fewer standoffs over a doorway. Fewer moments when Colleen felt like she had to prove something. Reggie was allowed to rest without anyone needing him to demonstrate that he'd learned a lesson. Colleen noticed she wasn't holding her breath as often. Whether Reggie was actually different or whether they had simply stopped asking him to handle situations that kept becoming difficult, she honestly couldn't say yet. A different professional, someone Doug found through the vet rather than a neighbor, didn't start by telling Colleen what Reggie was. She started by asking questions. When does his body change? How close is the person when it happens? What was happening right before? What's different about the situations that go fine? Colleen had never been asked to watch that closely before, and she found that she had answers. The growl, this person told her, wasn't something to defeat. In some dogs, in some situations, behavior like that can be related to creating distance. The context around it matters. Colleen didn't leave that conversation with a rule.
A growl is a warning, not a challenge. Punishing it or pushing closer can increase the chance of a bite.
She left with a different question to ask herself the next time it happened. And something different to try instead of holding her ground. If this story is helping you see dog behavior differently, leave a like. It really helps. And if you're struggling with reactivity or another behavior issue with your own dog, there's a resource in the description that may help you figure out the next step. Visitors stopped walking straight through the front door toward Reggie. He had a place to be, a mat by the stairs, before anyone else came in. People were asked to ignore him at first, not approach him. Colleen started reading his body before he had to tell her twice. If he backed toward that mat, she let him go. No test, no correction. He didn't have to greet anyone. He didn't have to prove anything. Watching from a distance was allowed to be enough. It changed smaller parts of their routine, too.
Good management is not failure. Creating distance and avoiding unnecessary pressure can prevent escalation.
Walks became more predictable, timed for quieter parts of the day instead of whenever it was convenient. Ben learned not to interrupt Reggie once he'd settled on his mat. And there were places the family simply stopped taking him. Not as punishment, not as failure, just a plain decision that some environments weren't ones he needed to be part of anymore. It wasn't seamless. One afternoon, a friend of Ben's came over and stood up from the couch too quickly. Reggie's whole body changed the way it had at the park. Before, Colleen might have frozen or pushed through it. This time, she was already moving, calling Reggie to his mat, guiding the boy a few steps farther back, changing the setup before anything could happen. Nothing did. And that was the whole outcome. Nothing happened. Colleen saw the change early and changed the situation before it became something more. A few weeks later, another visitor came to the house. Reggie went to his place by the stairs without being told. Nobody reached for him. He watched the whole visit from there, ears up, alert, but still. At some point, on his own, he got up, walked over to sniff the visitor's shoes, and then walked away again. Nobody made a thing of it. It wasn't a breakthrough. It was just an afternoon that went the way afternoons are supposed to go. The following weekend, Ben had a soccer game across town. Loud, crowded. The kind of Saturday morning when Reggie used to come along with the family automatically. Earlier in their life together, leaving him home might have felt like something was missing, like the family wasn't whole without him there. This time, Colleen clipped on his leash for a short walk first. Then Reggie settled in at home with a chew, while the rest of them left for the game without a second thought. It wasn't that Reggie couldn't be there, it was that nobody needed him to be. And for the first time, that felt like enough of a reason on its own. What do you think needed to change more, Reggie, or the way people were handling him? Tell me what you think in the comments. Reggie is still living with the Duffys. He still isn't a dog who goes everywhere or greets everyone. And the family no longer assumes that because he does well in one situation, he'll do just as well in another. That part of the story didn't disappear because the routine got better or the house got calmer. What changed was smaller than a cure and more useful than one. Colleen stopped asking Reggie to prove he was safe in every situation. Instead, she started asking a more specific question. Not what kind of dog is Reggie, but what does Reggie need right now to get through what's in front of him? Most days, that turns out to be answerable. And most days, that's enough. And if Reggie made you look at difficult behavior differently, watch Bugs' story on the screen now. What people saw in his kennel didn't tell the whole story.